When someone claims they can fit like a fully furnished 4-story Victorian mansion into a standard airplane carry-on suitcase, you don't just politely nod.
Right, you look for the false bottom.
Exactly. You question the physics of the claim. And today we're looking at a linguistic suitcase that's making a similarly massive promise to you, the learner.
It's a very bold promise.
It really is. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Our source material today is incredibly brief. I mean, we're talking just 15 words, but it is densely packed.
Yeah, it's essentially just the title and the heading of a language program.
Right. So the title reads, quote, Fluency in 5, a 5-month English mastery guide. And then immediately following that, the heading reads, How I Learned English in 5 months.
And, a text this brief might seem like an unusual focus for a deep dive, but we are looking at a highly engineered piece of educational marketing here.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the audacity of that claim is just wow.
What's fascinating here is the architecture of these specific words. Our mission today is to deconstruct that architecture. We need to look at the stark contrast between the commercial promise of rapid skill acquisition and the actual biological reality of human neuroplasticity.
Right, so let's start with the first half of that title. Fluency in 5, a 5-month English mastery guide. There are two distinct targets packed into one sentence there, fluency and mastery.
Yes.
And in any educational framework, those represent vastly different cognitive states, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they represent what I would call a profound semantic collision.
A semantic collision, okay.
Yeah, because in the context of language acquisition, fluency is essentially functional automation. It means you can retrieve vocabulary, you can construct basic syntax, and you can do it fast enough to maintain a conversation in real time.
So you're not constantly pausing to translate in your head.
Exactly. Neurologically speaking, fluency relies really heavily on procedural memory. Your brain is recognizing patterns and deploying these rehearsed chunks of language without needing the prefrontal cortex to, agonize over every single grammatical rule.
So the brain is basically running on an optimized autopilot for everyday survival.
Precisely. Now, mastery, on the other hand, demands deep structural dominance.
Okay.
A master understands the nuanced etymology, the irregular grammar rules, and crucially, the sociolinguistic context of why certain phrases are used in very specific situations.
So it's way beyond just surviving a trip to the grocery store.
Way beyond. It requires dynamic, highly complex neural networks that allow for abstract thought and rhetorical flexibility in the target language. So, promising both fluency and mastery simultaneously in a single short-term guide, well, it creates an incredibly high-stakes premise for you as the learner.
Right. It's like, isn't this like a fitness brochure promising to take you from the couch to running a 5K, but then calling itself an Olympic marathon mastery guide?
That is a perfect analogy.
Well, I mean, does combining fluency and mastery just set an impossible expectation for the learner? I wonder if holding a commercial language guide to an academic standard of mastery is, I don't know, maybe overly cynical on our part.
How do you mean?
Like, maybe the author is just using mastery as a shorthand for extreme competence? If the goal is just getting a learner to navigate a new country confidently, couldn't this combined promise just be a way of saying, hey, you won't just survive, you'll actually feel comfortable?
I get why you'd think that, and conflating the two might seem like harmless marketing, but it actually deeply skews a learner's understanding of the educational plateau.
The plateau.
Yeah, so when you learn a new skill, the initial curve is really steep. You pick up basic fluency relatively quickly because you're acquiring high-frequency words, the words you use every day.
Right, like, hello, where's the bathroom? Things like that.
Exactly. But moving from that fluency to true mastery requires exponentially more effort for diminishing visible returns.
Oh, wow.
So if a program promises mastery, but only actually delivers the tools for basic fluency, the learner inevitably hits that plateau, assumes they're failing, and quits.
Oh, because they think, I should be a master by now.
Right. Rather than recognizing that structural mastery is a completely different, much slower biological process.
That makes the timeline attached to this title even more critical to examine, I think, because the text just hammers this duration repeatedly. It says fluency in 5, then a 5-month guide, and finally in 5 months.
They really want you to focus on that number.
Yeah, so let's look at the mechanics of that 150-day window. Why land on exactly 5 months?
Well, from a purely psychological standpoint, 5 months is perfectly calibrated to bypass your skepticism.
Really? How so?
Modern consumers, we frequently encounter that 30 days to a new you framework.
Yeah, everywhere on social media.
Right, and it triggers an immediate reflex of disbelief. 30 days signals a lack of depth. Conversely, a 3-year mastery guide feels way too daunting.
Yeah, nobody's signing up for 3 years.
Exactly. Human beings really struggle with long-term goal visualization. So 5 months operates in this distinct middle ground.
It's like Goldilocks.
Yes. It signals that this endeavor will require sustained, serious effort, roughly a college semester and a half, yet it still provides a finite, highly visible finish line on your calendar.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. Let's look past the marketing psychology and apply this to the actual daily cognitive load.
Okay.
We're talking about 150 days to totally rewire a brain for English. That involves learning a notoriously irregular phonetic system, memorizing thousands of vocabulary words, and completely restructuring your native syntactic habits.
It's a massive undertaking.
Right. You can't just cram that kind of neurological adaptation. It feels to me like trying to bake a complex cake in 10 minutes by turning the oven up to 1,000 degrees.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Because the chemical reactions of baking require a minimum duration, right? Not just an increase in intensity.
The baking analogy is highly relevant to memory consolidation, actually.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because when an adult learns a new language, they are actively fighting against the established neural pathways of their native tongue.
That makes sense.
Acquiring new phones and syntax initially relies on the hippocampus to hold that short-term information. But for those new rules to become permanently encoded into the neocortex.
Which is what you need for mastery.
Right, which is required for the mastery this guide promises. The brain requires repeated cycles of spaced repetition and, crucially, sleep.
Right, because sleep is when the brain actually does the physical work, right? Like synaptic pruning and strengthening the connections we form during the day.
Exactly. Sleep is the absolute non-negotiable bottleneck of neuroplasticity.
Wow.
You literally cannot force the hippocampus to transfer data to the neocortex faster simply by staring at a textbook for 10 hours a day. The brain has a hard metabolic limit on how much new structural mapping it can consolidate in a 24-hour period.
So it's biologically capped.
Yes. To achieve mastery of a language as complex as English in 150 days would theoretically require bypassing the biological constraints of human memory formation.
Okay, but I have to challenge the idea that this timeline is entirely biologically impossible.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because we do see people achieve remarkable linguistic leaps in really short windows. Look at military immersion programs like the Defense Language Institute.
Right.
They take adults with zero background in a language and get them to highly operational levels in a matter of months. If someone completely immerses themselves, like no native language media, no speaking their mother tongue, intense daily study, isn't a 5-month transformation achievable?
Well, you're referencing highly specialized, deeply resourced environments there.
Sure.
Military immersion programs involve, 8 to 10 hours of formal instruction a day? They're heavily regulated environments with constant interaction with native-speaking instructors.
So it's not exactly reading a guidebook on the train commute.
Not at all. And even then, those programs generally aim for high-level operational fluency, not absolute mastery.
Ah, right. Back to the semantic collision.
Exactly. A commercial guide sold to an average consumer, someone who is likely balancing a job, a family, daily life, they simply cannot replicate the environmental pressure cooker required to force that level of rapid neural adaptation.
Which brings us perfectly to how the author attempts to validate this monumental promise.
Yes, the pivot.
Right, because after setting up this towering expectation of a universal 5-month curriculum, the text pivots dramatically. We go from the institutional authority of a 5-month English mastery guide to a highly subjective heading: How I Learned English in 5 Months.
It's a fascinating rhetorical shift.
It really is.
Moving from the objective, a guide, to the subjective, how I learned, fundamentally alters the dynamic between the author and the reader.
Because a guide implies something for everyone.
Right. A universal guide implies a standardized, peer-reviewed methodology that must withstand external scrutiny. But by shifting to a personal anecdote, the author steps down from the podium of the objective expert and presents themselves as a peer sharing a lived experience.
It effectively disarms the reader's critical thinking.
Completely.
When someone presents a universal claim, we naturally look for the flaws or the exceptions. We get defensive. But when someone simply states, hey, this is the story of how I did it, you can't really argue with their personal history. It serves as this emotional proof of concept.
Yes, and it creates a very powerful logical illusion.
A logical illusion.
Yeah, the implied narrative is, I am a normal person, I achieved this seemingly impossible goal, therefore my specific journey proves that this universal guide will work for you.
Right, if I can do it, you can do it.
Exactly. But this relies heavily on survivorship bias and totally ignores the massive variations in adult learning baselines.
Okay, let's explore that baseline variation because, we often dismiss these anecdotes as purely deceptive, but what if the author actually did learn English in 5 months?
Let's assume they did.
Right, let's say they optimized their vocabulary list. They found a brilliant way to map grammar, and it genuinely worked for their specific brain. Why shouldn't they reverse engineer that success into a mastery guide that works for you?
Because the success of their specific method may rely on a dozen invisible variables that simply cannot be packaged into a book.
Like what?
Well, the most critical invisible variable in language acquisition is native language proximity.
Okay, meaning how close your first language is to the one you're learning.
Precisely. If the author's native language was Dutch or German, their brain already possesses a vast amount of overlapping phonology and syntactic structure with English.
Right, the languages are cousins.
Exactly. They aren't building a house from scratch, they're just renovating an existing property.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it. Meanwhile, a reader whose native language is Mandarin or Arabic is starting with an entirely different foundational architecture.
Completely different.
They have to spend the first 2 months just training their ear to hear phonetic distinctions that don't even exist in their native tone.
Yes, and that phenomenon is known as phonological filtering.
Phonological filtering.
Right. By our first birthday, our brains have already begun pruning the neural pathways for sounds we don't hear in our immediate environment.
Wow, that early.
Yeah, it makes us highly efficient at our native language, but structurally deaf to foreign phones. And overcoming that filtering takes significant time. So if the author didn't have to overcome a steep phonological barrier, well, their 5-month timeline is completely irrelevant to a reader who does.
And there are so many other hidden advantages they could have had too. Like, did they study Latin for 6 years in grade school?
Exactly.
Did they have the financial freedom to study 8 hours a day without the stress of a full-time job? Do they simply have an atypical working memory capacity? The leap from my unique experience to your guaranteed roadmap is massive.
It really is. And it also creates a highly effective built-in defense mechanism for the curriculum itself.
Wait, how so?
Think about it. The title tells you the universal solution, the mastery guide. But the heading anchors the method in a personal anecdote. Okay, if you, the learner, fail to achieve mastery in 5 months, the subtle implication is that the guide isn't flawed. You simply failed to replicate the author's personal conditions accurately enough.
Oh, wow.
The burden of failure is quietly shifted from the methodology back onto the student.
That is so insidious. You're basically left holding the bag because you couldn't match the results of an N of 1 study that conveniently left out all its control variables.
Exactly.
It really highlights why we have to actively decode the educational frameworks presented to us.
Analyzing these specific 15 words reveals a masterclass in educational marketing.
It really does.
I mean, it leverages the semantic tension between functional fluency and comprehensive mastery to create an irresistible desire. It utilizes the 5-month timeline to project serious intent while remaining, just within the limits of human goal visualization.
The Goldilocks zone.
Right. And finally, it deploys the personal pronoun to bypass the critical faculties that would normally question the biological impossibility of the claim.
Man, we have covered a massive amount of ground today by unpacking this single brief excerpt. We looked at how the brain processes language differently when relying on the automated procedural memory of fluency versus the complex neural networks required for true mastery.
Right.
We explored the hard biological limits of memory consolidation, how your hippocampus and neocortex require spaced repetition and sleep, making a 150-day timeline a physiological bottleneck rather than just a scheduling challenge.
Exactly. You can't hack sleep.
You really can't. And we examined the rhetorical pivot from objective guide to subjective anecdote, unpacking hidden variables like native language proximity and phonological filtering that make universal promises based on personal success so problematic.
The ultimate takeaway here is recognizing that educational materials are often packaged not based on pedagogical realities, but on psychological triggers.
Yes.
Understanding the mechanisms behind how you actually learn and the biological time those mechanisms require is really the most effective way to protect your time and manage your own expectations when you're acquiring a new skill.
It's all about ensuring that the packaging doesn't dictate your understanding of your own progress. If someone shows you a carry-on suitcase and claims they've packed an entire mansion inside, You have every right to demand they open it up and show you exactly what foundational supports they left behind to make it fit.
Absolutely.
Which leaves you with one final provocative thought to ponder on your own today. If you were forced to distill your own greatest, most complex, hard-won skill into a strictly 5-month mastery guide for a total stranger, what hidden advantages, fortunate baselines, or invisible years of prior experience would you conveniently have to leave out of the title?